microphone. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Virtual History 360, and welcome to your review for your Federalist exam. Whether you're here to review for your exam that you have for me, or if you are just reviewing the Federalist, I say that plural because Washington kind of falls under that category, or if you're just reviewing for the Federalist, Washington and Adams presidencies, you've come to the right spot. So, let me know in the chat who you are. If you have me, if you have Mrs. Ing, let me know so I can say hi to you, shout you out. And if you have any questions, as always, put them in the chat so that we know, meaning everyone, what we're going to talk about, what we need to work with, what I can help you with. Because remember, you're giving up your time to get ready. You are doing something to better yourself, and that's why we're here tonight. Alright, so I see in the chat Jason is here. I see Angelina. I see the letter A. Not sure who you are, but welcome. Glad you are here. Glad you guys are spending this time with me so that we can review for this, just wonderful concept of the first presidencies. I know it sounds so exciting, right? So, we'll start by just, giving people time to get in. It's a little after 7:30 on my watch right here, so I'm going to ask, how's everyone doing? Hope you're having a good week. I know it's kind of a weird, week being a short week. It's Wednesday, but it feels like a Tuesday. I know my week's all messed up. So what about you? How are you guys handling all this? Hope you're doing okay. Hope you're ready to review for this test that we have tomorrow. So, as we go for a couple minutes, just to see people hopefully get notifications. I think I told this story before, but what was it, 2 years ago, I remember, or maybe last year, I did a live stream, and it went, I think it was like a 7 o'clock live stream on a Monday, and then the Tuesday, the next day, I was out to eat, my family, Mrs. Ing's family, we went out to dinner together, and at 7 o'clock, her phone went off, and it was a notification of my live stream from the day before. Now, I can't really, catch a live stream if you're a day late, right? So, hopefully YouTube's gonna push out my notifications, and hopefully we get some people that want to review for this test. I'll give them a couple more minutes before I get into the content, but as always, if you have questions or you need help on anything, I will do my best to answer. Not saying I can answer everything, but I will do my best, or at least I'll point you in the right direction, right? So, we're going to get started soon, but just know that the Federalist covers the first two presidencies. We have George Washington and John Adams. And as I had alluded to at the beginning, George Washington wasn't quote-unquote part of a political party, but he shared very similar Federalist ideals to Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, and the like. So that's why he gets lumped in and why we call this unit the Federalist Unit. Okay? So, what do you say? It is 7:33. I think I've stalled for long enough. This should be a relatively quick review. I'm thinking maybe a half hour or so. Nice. Alright. I'm thinking this will be about a half hour or so. Maybe 45 if we get a lot of questions. But if we don't get a lot of questions, I'll run through the material just to review everything we've talked about. And then we shall get going, okay? So, I'm going to bring up a couple documents here so I have reference. Again, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. But just to review our scale more, I'll start with that as our content. Okay? Well, what do we have? We have, I know the numbers change, but it's really 4 levels of material, right? Well, what did we talk about? We talked about precedents as level 1, right? There's a few big ones, okay? And some of the ones that a lot of people really struggle with, and I'm going to go into greater detail later, and I'm going to jump back and forth, but some of the questions that are concept of precedents that were hard work, what do we call the president? And the idea, why I harped on this so much in class, and why I made such a big deal of this, is the fact that Washington really wanted us to understand, and wanted the government to understand, that he was not a king, okay? That's why we talked about, what do we call him? He didn't call me His Majesty or Your Majesty George Washington, Your Majesty, His Majesty the President. No, just Mr. President. That'll work. And that lumps in with how many terms. He could have served for life. He's the only president to win the electoral vote unanimously. He could have continued to serve until the day he died, much like a king, but he didn't. He stepped down after the second term. He was going to step down after the first term, but they talked him into it. So he came back and he served that second term, but he said, after that, I'm done. I'm retiring. I'm going home. I am going to transition power to someone else. Again, not a king, a president. So what do we call him? Serving 2 terms. That really ties that in. And then he gave us, the idea of avoiding permanent alliances, trying to remain neutral. It was his isolationism that really, set the stage for foreign policy moving forward, because he said we don't need to be neutral forever, but rather be neutral and work on ourselves for a while, because we're a small, a young, relatively weak country compared to the European powers. And he knew that, and he was just, wise, that he knew that if he didn't, stop the country from meddling and getting involved in all these European messes, that these bigger countries are just going to push us around. So that was the idea of avoiding foreign entanglements. Angelina, the level 3 was the Alien and Sedition Acts. If you look at that, and in answering the question, did Alien and Sedition Acts violate the First Amendment? Hopefully that answers your question. Hopefully you can find out. Okay. Then we get into the challenges. That's level 2, or the next level, I should say. The challenges faced in our first presidency. We have challenges at home. You have Mad Anthony Wayne in the Battle of Fallen Timbers, defeating the natives. That's one. The other is the Whiskey Rebellion. Remember, farmers would grow their grain, specifically corn at this point, and they didn't really have cash because they weren't selling it. They were trading, barter, a barter economy in the agrarian area. Okay? Jason, I'm going to get to your question in just one second. I want to finish the Whiskey Rebellion real quick. And just to sum it up real fast then, if you don't have cash, if you're not selling the crops, you would not have cash to pay taxes on the goods. Well, they would take the extra grain, they would distill it into a whiskey, and they would trade that whiskey for whatever they needed. Well, the government came around and said, you can grow this much corn, that means you can distill this much whiskey, you have to pay this much tax. Can you see why they were upset? So there was an uprising. Washington leads the troops, quote unquote. He didn't actually go to the front lines, but he was the only president to lead troops into combat, if you will. And they put down the rebellion, but nevertheless, farmers were still unhappy. Alright, so the question, do I think the Alien and Sedition Acts violated the First Amendment? Yes, I personally do. Now, you can make the argument that, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, you can't write lies about people, that's libel. If you write it, it's libel. If you say it, it's slander. There's a lot to that, right? But when it comes down to it, the First Amendment says the government can't stop you from protesting the government, whether that be through speech or through the press, printed material. And the Sedition Act did, which is why the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions nullified, because it was an unconstitutional rule. Now, foreshadowing a little, the Supreme Court didn't really have the power of judicial review yet. That doesn't come until Marbury v. Madison, which we'll talk about next unit, which is why the Supreme Court couldn't strike down the Sedition Act, and it took the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions to do that. Okay? Good. Keep these questions coming, guys, because questions are really what drives these live streams, okay? So it looks like we got a handful of people. We got 5 people in, it looks like. So hopefully, man, we've come a long way. The wrong way, but we've come a long way. First live stream, we had 18. Makes me wonder. But you guys, you're the consistent ones. I'm seeing the same names, okay? Now, I know some people said today they couldn't because they were busy, but I appreciate you guys. We'll pause for a second and just say thank you, because I don't care. Live stream is what it is, but you guys are showing that you're trying to do better and you're working towards this, and that means a lot, okay? And it's really going to pay off. It's going to help you, okay? So thank you for that. I appreciate you guys taking that initiative. All right, so that covers, the or what was I, domestic, right? So then we have the foreign, we have England impressing, or Britain impressing our merchant ships, capturing the crews and making them serve in the British Navy. You can see why we'd be upset. So we send John Jay over to negotiate a treaty, and he doesn't do anything about impressment. But he does, get Britain to leave some of the soil, or, move out and open up some of the land for us. So, I think it was a good deal personally, but you can see why people are upset. It's like, you went over to negotiate ending impressment, and the treaty doesn't mention impressment at all. So you can see why people are a little upset by that, right? And then, of course, signing the treaty with Britain. All right, Jason. Hey, we're at what? About the 15-minute mark, 10-15-minute mark when you rewatch this, so you can catch the end, okay? Have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow. All right, where was I? Okay, so yeah. So we signed a treaty with Britain, and of course, Spain, to the west, is like, are you guys going to gang up against me? So then we send Pinckney over to sign a treaty, and that opens up the Mississippi to guarantee our travel of the river so that we can ship our goods grown on the river, on the western frontier, and ship them to where we need to, around the country or to Europe. So that's Pinckney's treaty. So we have the two treaties for foreign. We also have the domestic affairs, right? That's level 2. And then when we get into level 3, that kind of shifts gears altogether. We go to the election of 1796 with the election of John Adams. Okay? And John Adams, being a Federalist, had very similar ideals to Washington, but kind of just messed up and didn't do a very good job. Didn't get reelected. Only a one-term president, right? Well, I guess we'll figure that out when we get to the election of 1800 next unit. But, yes, we're only studying one term of his presidency, right? So, John Adams had to deal with a lot, but the two things that we focused on were the XYZ affair, where, remember we talked about England attacking our merchant ships. Now France was doing it. So we send our diplomats over to meet with French Foreign Minister Talleyrand, and they refuse to meet with us unless we pay a tribute or a bribe. Well, that's not treating us as an equal country. We say we'd rather fight you than pay you a bribe. Luckily, they negotiate a peace before the war, but that threat of war is always looming during Adams' presidency. That distrust of the French and, not being on even footing really just kind of just drove home, just the despair and anger. Okay? Letter A. Keep it on topic, please. Thank you. So then that leads into a couple of acts that were passed through the Federalist Congress to get through, just the distrust, the Alien Act, deporting anyone, okay? Oscar Gamer Box from Mrs. Ng's 8th period. I will tell her that you were here. Thank you. I appreciate you. You'll enjoy this and you'll do well, okay? The Alien Act, basically trusting non-citizens, or distrusting non-citizens, and the Sedition Act, which we kind of talked about, where if you wrote false or negative things about the government, you could be arrested, and again, violating your First Amendment rights. That's why it gets nullified by the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, right? So that kind of wraps up the 3 big levels. Obviously there's a 4th level where if you get through all this and you connect it to present day, you can boost your grade and you help yourself out. And, vocab, make sure you know that. So, kind of wrapping up, go through your notes, go through your notebook, and cover it all, right? So, being, 10, 15 minutes into this review. Again, if you have questions, put them into the chat. But I'm going to keep going unless you guys have something to ask me after I drink of water. Sorry, makes noises. All right, so our first 2 levels dealt with Washington, so we spent the bulk of our time on Washington. Let's talk about Washington, okay? We talked about his ideas of not getting tangled in foreign affairs because, again, remaining isolated or neutral allows us to build our country rather than wasting money and losing money on wars that we get pushed around on, right? So the idea that if we need help, we have friends, right? But if we need to help someone, right, we can. It's not saying ever. There's a key word that I need you to remember, and that is permanent. Okay? Washington advised against permanent, and we'll say it again, permanent foreign alliances. Okay? Meaning we promise to stick with you no matter what, and then all of a sudden that other country makes us do things that aren't good for us. All right? They use us as a pawn in their game of chess. So you avoid the permanent foreign alliances. Okay? Permanent. I said it a bunch. Permanent. Okay? Avoid permanent. Right? Okay? And then Washington, again, being a genius, that he wasn't a genius that knew everything. What would you do if you don't know everything? You ask people who know better than you, right? If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I don't know if you ever heard that before. Always find places where you can learn things, right? Washington knew he wasn't the best with the economy or foreign affairs. So you know what he did? He gets Alexander Hamilton to be the Secretary of Treasury, someone smarter with money than he was. And he gets Thomas Jefferson to be the Secretary of State, foreign relations, dealing with other countries, doing things that help him, right? Or doing things that help the country with their relationships with other countries that Washington wasn't really the expert, right? All right, so, Shannon Morgan. I don't know Shannon Morgan. Do I recognize that name? Are you my student? Are you a subscriber? Are you a Miss Eng's student? Help me out. But let me ask, why do you think delegates were able to compromise during the Constitutional Convention versus politics of today? I like it. You guys did this to me last time. You give me those hard-hitting questions. I like it. You put me on the spot. Let me think. I think the best answer I could give, and I don't know if it's the right word, but I'm going to say deadline. Okay? Because the Constitutional Convention, they had basically, lied to get people there saying, we're going to revise the articles, but when they started, they realized we can't revise. They throw it out and they start fresh. And they realized that they had to get it done. Right? Now, you could argue that that wasn't necessarily the best. There's a lot of things kind of thrown in at the end. Subscriber from Ohio. All right, you've opened up. What part of Ohio? I'm intrigued. I was born in western Pennsylvania, Grove City Hospital, actually. So I know the border there. All right. So I have friends that live in Columbus and, Cincinnati area, or eastern Indiana, really. So yeah, I'm curious. I'm intrigued. But they had a deadline. They said, we need to get this done. And that causes people to, make compromises for the sake of ending. Like the Electoral College is a great example. There's very little, if you look at James Madison's notes, there's very little debate over the Electoral College compared to other issues. I'm not saying they didn't debate it, but it was smaller because it was, at this point, it was getting to September. And they're like, you know what? We're done. Electoral College sounds good. Boom, we're happy. Right? I very oversimplified that, okay? But, so, if you think about it like that, if there isn't a pressing issue to get something done, you're more likely to dig your heels in, right? And personally, and this is my personal, I don't speak for anyone else, I think that's really what it is, okay? Does that make sense? Hopefully that answered your question. I hope I didn't dodge too much of it, but I really like that question. That was a good one. All right. Ethos, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but what is the test mostly about? The Federalist. Haha. Washington and Adams. Boom. Think about the presidencies of John Adams and the presidency of George Washington. That's what the test is about. If you go through your scale and go through your notes, you'll find it all there. Okay? Now, where was I? So we talked about advisors. Washington couldn't know it all. So he had, people that could. Cleveland. I've never been to Cleveland. We'll share a funny story. I was supposed to go to Cleveland in 2009. 2009. I was going to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction for Metallica, one of my favorite bands. And I was also going to go to the Philadelphia Phillies opening day because it was the year after they won the World Series. And I had it timed out that it was going to be perfect. And then they changed opening day. They moved opening day up 2 days. And I couldn't make the trip work, so I had to cancel my Cleveland trip. So Cleveland is on my list to visit. Haven't been there yet, but I will get there one day, I promise. Okay. Let's see. Speaking of, actually, bring up a good point, kind of a good segue about compromise. During Washington's presidency, there was a great compromise of the national bank. Remember, we wanted to centralize the bank, centralize our credit, centralize our debt, so that our economy would remain stable, right? Well, Southern states weren't opposed, or the Democratic Republicans were opposed to this. They didn't like the idea. So Alexander Hamilton, gets this credit for negotiating a compromise where, hey, if you give me the bank, you give me the votes to pass the national bank, we'll put the nation's capital near the southern colony, or the southern states, I should say. So instead of Philadelphia or New York, they moved it to where it is today, Washington D.C. Hopefully, everyone knows our nation's capital is Washington D.C., right? All right, so let's see. Oh, Ethan's Ethan. Oh, good question. Let's see, where was I? Hey, it's Fondy. If Federalists support the strong federal government and Democratic Republicans supported the opposite, then why would happen? What would happen if it was the opposite? If Federalists didn't support the federal government? All right. So where was I? That's a great question. Federalists did not support the federal government, and the Democratic Republicans supported it. Who would win? I don't know. Um, I don't know how to answer that. That's a weird question. It's funny. I like it. It's making me think, but I don't know. Hey, Maureen, I see you there. Hopefully you're enjoying this. I don't think I think the country would win because both sides would still be represented. Again, the whole two-party system, and we'll talk about Washington's warnings in a second. But yeah, I think it would balance out in the end, right? All right, so the Federalists, Ethan, right? Sorry, I'm trying to read the chat, and I have like multiple screens. Federalists were the ones that supported the the original. If you think about the people that pushed for the Constitution, the Anti-Federalists were those that were opposed to a too strong a central government and wanted to protect our rights. So Federalists, Anti-Federalists, right? The Federalists kept that notion, compromised with the Bill of Rights, but the Democratic Republicans formed out of those Anti-Federalists that didn't trust the government. They said that they would become too powerful and take away our rights. Does that make sense? So that's what the Federalists were. Think of it, big government. Think of Democratic Republicans or the Anti-Federalists as state governments. Okay. All right. So let's see. Where are we here? Did I miss anything? Let me double check. Oh, what would I do if I were in the Federalist season? If I was a Federalist, I don't know what event you're talking about. So, Oscar, if you want to clarify what event or clarify a question, I can help you out there. And Maureen's casting saying, if I were in the federal event, again, Maureen and Oscar, clarify that for me. I'm not worried about the misspelling. I don't know what you mean by federal event. Okay. Angelina was level 3. Level 3 is John Adams. The two things you need to know from John Adams are XYZ Affair and Alien and Sedition Acts, which I know that's technically 3 things because the Alien Act, Sedition Act, but we lump them together, okay? All right, let's get back on track. We are going to 7 minutes. This is actually going pretty well. Let's see. Make sure I hit everything on my notes here. We talked about the cabinet 2 terms. Remember we talked about that. We wanted to make sure he wasn't, a king. So he stepped down. He voluntarily stepped down from power when he could have served for life, right? And we talked about the warning. Okay, we're kind of getting into that. You're talking about the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans and where they stood. Remember, Washington warned us about this because the idea of nation over state. People fighting for self-interest over what's good for the country, right? We talked about the Whiskey Rebellion and how he said that, you got to do this peacefully. I will send in the army if I need to put down this rebellion because you are doing something for self-interest and you are not, doing what's best for the country. Same thing with his warnings of political parties, because political parties could cause a division in the country where you choose to side with your party over what's best for the country, and that goes for both sides, okay? So that's his warning on political parties about dividing the country. I think he got that one right if you look at what's going on, right? Let's see. So level 2 are the issues of what was going on during Washington's presidency. Remember we talked about the Battle of Fallen Timbers. That's kind of a small thing, in the grand scheme of this exam review. But then you had the Whiskey Rebellion, you had and Jay's Treaty. Pinckney's Treaty is also kind of small; those are on the outside, the fringes. But Jay's Treaty and the Whiskey Rebellion. Did the Federalists accept Adams in the XYZ? Well, no. Like, he kind of alienated himself because he kind of played the middle of the field a little too much, where he was distrusting the French, but he was also alienating people in America. So it kind of went against him. So by the end of his presidency, he wasn't really accepted. He was very unpopular by the end of his presidency. Let's see what else we got to talk about. Oh, the warnings. I don't know if I mentioned this. I just want to clarify. He warns about these avoiding debt, avoiding permanent alliances. This is all in his farewell address, which, remember, he didn't deliver as a speech, but rather, had James Madison and Alexander Hamilton write it for him and printed in a newspaper while he was in his carriage on his way back to Mount Vernon. So, it wasn't like a big speech, hey, I'm leaving, this is it. But rather it was, hey, read this while I leave because I retire. Okay? Washington's presidency would be the biggest, I guess. I don't know. There's 15 questions, so there's 15 different things you need to know. I don't ask 10 questions on one thing, maybe a couple, right? I'll get to XYZ in just a couple minutes. I'm going to wrap up Washington, then we kind of keep it a little bit together, okay? Let's see. Make sure I hit everything here. We talked about the cabinet. We talked about the warnings from the farewell address, like political parties and permanent foreign allies is permanent. I'm saying that again. Stepping down power, the American Cincinnatus. Remember, the guy was giving up power rather than holding on, becoming a dictator. You talked about one of the big things. I mentioned Jay's Treaty. Remember, Britain was impressing our sailors, our merchant sailors, and forcing them to serve in the British Navy. And Jay's Treaty, I think I mentioned this, but I want to reiterate. What it did, while it calmed things down, it didn't actually address the issue he went to go talk about, which was impressing our sailors, our merchants. So because it didn't address impressment, it's like a tongue twister. Because it didn't address impressment, people were upset. Like, you went over to deal with impressment and you didn't deal with it. You might have got us something, but it didn't actually, solve the big issue. It did go away eventually after the War of 1812, but we'll get to that next unit. Okay. Let's see. I think got all that. Yeah, and then Washington again putting nation above country. Avoid political parties and don't do things selfishly or violently. If you want the country changed, there are peaceful means. That's the First Amendment, the right to protest, right? So that's important. I think that wraps up Washington. I think I can move on. All right. So let's see. So we have people asking XYZ affair and the tensions between France and John Adams. Again, it comes from the tensions with France and John Adams comes from the idea that we were treated unfairly from the XYZ affair. Kind of all gets that start there. That's why we cover it. The XYZ affair was after, Britain was attacking us, we signed a treaty. France starts attacking our ships. Because again, remember, we're trying to be neutral. Washington's isolationism, right? So we are trying to remain neutral. France doesn't like that because we're sailing and trading, so they start attacking us. So we send our diplomats over, including John Marshall, to negotiate with the French foreign minister, their diplomat, basically. Well, our Secretary of State, if you think of it like that. Well, we didn't even get a chance to get into the same room as Talleyrand because he sent his representatives saying, if you want to meet with us, you got to pay us a bribe. Which is just disrespect. Because, if you don't treat us as equals, meet with us and talk with us, disrespect doesn't work with us. So we'd rather spend millions on fighting a war than paying you $1 in bribe, right? So that just, people got mad. When John Marshall came back and wrote that and said what happened, people were just mad. And that starts the tension between France and John Adams because of this. Now, negotiations happened. We did avoid war, but it was always up and down, getting closer and closer and closer. Okay? And that leads into the Alien and Sedition Acts because we didn't trust the French people living here in the United States. Okay? So people couldn't write bad. If they said the government's doing something bad, they couldn't write about it. That's the Sedition Act. Okay? And again, in my opinion, a violation of the First Amendment. but it was done for national security. But again, we didn't have judicial review at the time, so it wasn't the Supreme Court that shot down the Sedition Act. It was the states, actually, Virginia and Kentucky. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Remember that when we reviewed that? I remember there was a crossword puzzle or a crossword question about this. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions nullified the Alien and Sedition Acts because they violated the Constitution. Again, the First Amendment. I agree with it. Okay? So, all's well that ends well, right? Okay. Now, that's the Sedition Act, really. Alien is a separate one. Remember, anyone that could pose a threat, if you're an alien living here or a non-citizen resident, a resident non-citizen, you could deport them if you posed a threat. Not if you did anything. You didn't have to break the law. This is why the Alien Act was so bad. And that goes against your Fourth Amendment right of being deported without actually committing a crime, but rather threatening or posing a threat to the government. Okay? I think I've hit everything. I mean, I'm looking at my notes here, and I think I've covered everything. So I'm just going to say it's 8 o'clock. We've been going for a little over a half hour, 34 minutes on my timer, if you count the warm-up. So I'll say, any last questions? Like I said, this is going to be a short one. I thought this would be easy, just covering Washington and Adams. I'll say another 45 seconds. If there's no questions, then we'll end it there. But I think you guys are ready. I really do. You put your time in to study and to review your notes. You put your time in to watch this review and ask questions. You're going to be ready for the test. And again, if you watch this again, it's only going to help you. Trust me, I hit the key points. That's why you're here, right? So, last call, 15 seconds. But otherwise, I think you guys are good. All right? Okay, so with that being said, it is 8:02 on my watch. There's no more questions. I'm going to end it here. Please have a good rest of your night. Get some rest, eat some breakfast in the morning, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. All right, bye everyone. Take care.